Welcome along to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive. If you want more like this, more in-depth rugby analysis, make sure you hit subscribe on Rugby Obsession right now.
Definitely do. So today we're getting into quite a heated topic, really, sparked by that Planet Rugby piece covering Stephen Jones's recent comments.
Yeah, the veteran journalist, Stephen Jones. And it's all about the upcoming British and Irish Lions tour to Australia in 2025.
And the real flashpoint seems to be his reaction to Australia's coach, Joe Schmidt, hinting, well, more than hinting really, that top Wallabies players are going to be rested for those warm-up games, the provincial matches.
Exactly. So our mission today, if you like, is to unpack what Jones is arguing, look at the points he makes, and think about what this might actually mean for the tour itself.
Okay, so where do we start? Jones's main accusation is pretty blunt. He uses the word betrayal.
Yeah, a betrayal of the Lions by Joe Schmidt and, by extension, Rugby Australia. He seems really quite put out.
He quotes himself, or rather Planet Rugby quotes his Sunday Times column, saying the Lions are basically being invited over to play an inadequate side. That's pretty strong language.
It really is. He doesn't just blame Australia, does he? He sort of suggests the Lions perhaps should have been tougher in the negotiations.
Right. He makes the point that maybe the strength of those non-test opponents should have been, I don't know, written into the contract somehow, locked down.
Which does make you wonder, why wasn't it? Or was it just assumed? It raises questions about how these tour agreements actually work behind the scenes.
And Jones's argument goes a bit further. He talks about gratitude, or maybe a lack of it, from the host nation.
Yeah, he even suggests, quite radically perhaps, that the Lions should look at developing other touring options. Almost like creating leverage.
Exactly. To, as he puts it, hold to ransom the traditional hosts if they feel they aren't getting a fair shake in terms of the opposition's strength. It's a bold idea.
It is. And look, this specific issue, resting players for these games, it's not entirely unprecedented, is it? Jones himself brings that up.
No, he mentions that the All Blacks and the Springboks have done similar things on previous tours, resting their top guys before the tests.
So there's historical context here. It's something that's happened before.
Definitely. But Jones clearly feels it undermines the whole point of the tour, or at least a key part of it. The Lions building momentum and testing themselves properly before the big games. He thinks it impacts the quality.
He also mentions promises or agreements from the past that maybe haven't quite been kept.
Yeah, he refers back to something from, I think he says 2 tours ago, some kind of understanding that the best local players would be involved in those early tour games right up until just before the first test.
And apparently, someone senior within the Lions setup had previously stated they were going to insist on Australia fielding strong teams this time around.
That's right. And then you've also got Phil Waugh, the RA chief executive, on record saying how important it is for their test stars to play against the Lions in those franchise matches. So, the public messages seemed aligned at one point.
But then contrast that with Joe Schmidt's more recent comments. He's been pretty open about his strategy.
Very open. He's basically said his priority is protecting what he sees as his core test group, about 23 to 25 players.
Yeah, the quote was quite clear. The policy is that we'd probably be very keen to safeguard what we perceive to be our best 23, 24, or 25, and then the rest of the squad for them to get games to play against the Lions.
So safeguard the top group, let the others get a run out against the Lions. It's a clear prioritization.
Which, predictably perhaps, got a sharp reaction from Jones.
Oh, yeah. He was quite sarcastic, wasn't he? Something like, so all the top players will appear in the non-test games apart from 25. It is absolutely ridiculous. You can really hear his frustration there.
You absolutely can. And his underlying worry, the core of his argument, is how this affects the Lions' own preparation.
Right. He believes facing, let's say, weakened provincial sides just won't give the Lions the challenge they need to sharpen up for the test series.
His logic is they need that high-level competition to, quote, perfect their test operation, to properly test combination strategies, everything, under real pressure.
And if they don't get that, well, Jones raises the concern that the Lions coach, Andy Farrell, will end up making test selections based on what Jones calls bogus evidence.
Bogus evidence, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they've only seen players perform against weaker opposition. It potentially clouds the selection picture.
Definitely. It could make picking that first test team a bit more of a gamble, maybe.
Could do. Now, speaking of getting insights, if you're finding this discussion valuable, just a reminder to subscribe to Rugby Obsession. We dive deep like this regularly.
Please do. Now, Jones also tackles the counter-argument, the idea that players need this rest.
Yeah, he's not buying the recovery time argument, is he?
Not really. He actually lists the dates. He points out the gap between the provincial games and that first test in Brisbane.
Let's see, it's 21 days after the Force game, 17 after the Reds, 14 after the Waratahs.
And still 10 days even after the Brumbies match, which is the last one before the first test.
So his point is there's actually quite significant recovery time built in there already.
Exactly. Especially, he notes, when the Lions themselves are playing twice a week during parts of the tour, he questions if resting that many key Wallabies for those games is genuinely necessary for recovery or if it's purely tactical.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it? Balancing the demands of a modern tour, player welfare, versus the tradition and maybe the spirit of a Lions tour.
It absolutely does. And, that leads us nicely into asking you, our listeners, what side do you fall on here?
Yeah, we're genuinely interested. Do you think Stephen Jones has a point? Is it a betrayal? Or is Joe Schmidt just doing what any sensible coach would do for his team?
Let us know your thoughts. Drop a comment below the video or wherever you're listening. We'd love to see what the consensus is, or if there even is one.
It's a complex issue, for sure. Jones' article certainly throws a spotlight on the pressures and expectations surrounding these massive tours.
It really does. It underlines the unique nature of the Lions, but also the competing priorities for the host nations who are ultimately trying to win a test series.
Okay, well, that just about wraps up our deep dive into Stephen Jones's comments and the potential implications for the Lions tour down under. We hope that's given you a good overview of the arguments.
Yeah, hopefully some food for thought as the build-up to 2025 continues. It's certainly going to be a talking point right up until kickoff, I suspect.
No doubt. So one last reminder, please do subscribe to Rugby Obsession for more deep dives and analysis.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive, and we look forward to you listening to our next episode.